All right, guys, Dare Group recap. We talked about how in the book of Genesis, God made everything tov, or the Hebrew word is tov, and he said it was good. But things quickly unraveled because of sin, and we know that God has been on a mission ever since to re-tov the world. But we see examples of things not being good, like in the book of Judges. We get all the way to the book of Judges, and it's just a mess. I mean, it's people trying to serve God, failing, trying to please God, failing. You get all the way to the end of the book, and it says, basically, at the end, everyone just does what was right in their own eyes. It's just a mess. What did they forget? Well, the reason they were in that cycle of trying and failing is they forgot something so important that happened generations earlier with the Joshua generation. Because the Joshua generation had just come out of a series of 40 years of people trying to please God, failing, trying, and failing. And something key happened. They crossed over the Jordan, but it was the way that they did that was so important. And we find out the answer in Hebrews chapter 11, verse 6, which says this: "But without faith, it's impossible to please God." Doesn't matter how hard you try, without faith, it's impossible. And so we need to go from trying to please God to trusting to please God. And how does that manifest itself? Well, some of the ways we talk about is, number one is this: trust manifests itself by letting go of our will and our way. So here's a question for you. Are there areas of your life where you just have to admit that you've just been trying and you've been in this cycle, but you really haven't been trusting? You might be able to share that with people. The Bible talks about how whenever we confess things or even share things with one another, that actual healing happens when we do that. And I know it'd be hard for some of us to do that, but if you can, are there areas of your life where you've just honestly admit you've been trying really hard, but not really trusting God? Second thing we talked about is how trust relocates risk. And how even though it was risky in the natural for them to step into the Jordan at flood stage, because God said to do it, it actually turns out that was the least risky thing that they could do because God said it. And the most risky thing they could do is to not do that, to be outside of God's will. So trust, whenever we trust God, it relocates where the risk is. So here's another question: what if the risk in your life was relocated? If it was relocated, what would you do? Let me give it to you another way. If you had 10 times the faith you had right now, what step would you take? What would you do if the risk was now relocated? All right, the third thing we talked about is how trust exposes lies. Because as soon as you take a step to try to trust God, all these lies are going to start coming up. And for me, the lie was, you're not a starter. And I could never start something from scratch, yet God calls me to start a church. So here's a question for you. Are there lies that you're wrestling with that are keeping you from God's destiny for you? What are some of those lies that you wrestle with? Maybe what are some truths you need to embrace? Are we trying to please God, or are we trusting to please God? I believe as we wrestle with this, there's going to be freedom for people, freedom even in your group. And I believe God's going to do something as we wrestle with this question. Are we trying to please God or trusting to please God?